Welcome back to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Tonight, we're crossing the ocean to the misty Scottish Highlands, home to the deep waters, old legends, and one of the most famous creatures in the world. For nearly a century, people have claimed they've seen something moving beneath the surface of Loch Ness. Not a wave, not a shadow. Something large, something alive. Scientists have searched for it, skeptics have dismissed it, and witnesses still swear they know what they saw. So tonight, we're diving into the history, the sightings, the science, and the question that never seems to go away. Is the Loch Ness Monster just a myth? Or is something still hiding in the dark? Loch Ness is quiet in a way that feels intentional. The water is darker than it should be, almost black, like it absorbs the light instead of reflecting it. Even on clear days, you can't see very far down. The surface looks calm, but beneath, it is a depth that refuses to be fully known. Over 700 feet in places. Cold, heavy, and untouched by sunlight. Sound doesn't travel well here. Voices feel smaller. Boats cut through the water, and the ripples disappear faster than expected, like the loch is swallowing them. And people have been watching this water for centuries. Long before cameras, long before sonar, long before tourists arrived with binoculars and expectations. People stood on these shores and said something moved beneath the surface, something too large, too intentional to be ignored. Some swear they've seen humps breaking the water. Others describe a long neck rising just long enough to be unmistakable, and then gone. Most sightings are brief, seconds, moments, just enough time to wonder if your eyes betrayed you. And that's the problem. Because if it were just a myth, just a story passed down for fun, why has it survived this long? Why does it keep resurfacing across generations, even as technology improves and skepticism grows stronger? Why do people who don't believe in monsters still hesitate before answering that question? Tonight, we're not here to prove anything. We are here to sit with the uncertainty, to look at what's been seen, what's been dismissed, and what still refuses to sink. Because whether Nessie is a living creature, a misidentified natural phenomenon, or something else entirely, the water is still dark. And something keeps pulling our attention back to it. Long before tourists came with cameras and sonar, Loch Ness was already a place of stories. One of the earliest recorded encounters comes from the 6th century. St. Columba, a missionary traveling through Scotland, was said to have encountered a creature in the River Ness. A local man had been attacked by something in the water. A water beast, the text describes. Columba commanded it to stop, and it did. Whether you take the story literally or as legend, it tells us something important. People have been seeing something in these waters for over 1,000 years. Scottish folklore is full of similar tales. Lochs, rivers, and deep bodies of water were often thought to be home to mysterious creatures. Kelpies, water horses, giant eels, or beasts with long necks. Many of these stories served a practical purpose: warnings to children, explanations for drownings, or a way to respect dangerous, unknowable waters. There's a pattern here. Across cultures, the deeper and darker the water, the more likely people are to imagine, or perhaps see, something lurking beneath. Could this be fear taking shape? Or might there have been something real, glimpsed briefly before it vanished again? When I think about these early sightings, I can't help but wonder, were people seeing a creature that truly existed? Or were they giving a shape to the fear that came from the dark, cold waters of the loch? Either way, the legend had begun. And it's one that would not fade with time. To understand why so many people have claimed to see something in Loch Ness, it helps to understand the loch itself. It's not just any lake. Loch Ness is vast, over 20 miles long, 1 mile wide in places, and astonishingly deep. At its deepest, it plunges more than 700 feet, deeper than most people can even imagine. The water is cold, dark, and murky. Visibility is minimal. Even on a sunny day, the depths remain hidden. And it's not just the darkness that makes it mysterious. The loch's temperature is unremarkably stable. A thick layer of cold water sits beneath the surface, undisturbed. Currents are subtle, but can move objects in unpredictable ways. The loch shape, narrow in some parts, wide in others, creates pockets where waves, echoes, and sonar readings behave strangely. Scientists and explorers have noticed this odd behavior repeatedly. Sonar blips sometimes appear to move like large animals, only to vanish when investigated. Cameras catch nothing, or the images are distorted by the water's murkiness. Objects dropped into the loch rarely surface. Something about the depth and density seems to swallow them whole. It's easy to see why the loch has fed imaginations for centuries. A shadow moves across the water, and you can't be sure if it's a ripple, a log, or a fish, or something far larger. One moment, the water is calm, and the next, it churns without explanation. Standing at the shore, it's impossible not to feel a quiet unease. The loch is alive in its own way, indifferent to our curiosities. And it's this combination of size, depth, and darkness that has made it a perfect place for mystery to grow, where even the most skeptical mind has to admit something could be hiding below. When you look at it now, it's easy to see why people continue to return, hoping for a glimpse, and why, year after year, sighting after sighting, the legend persists. The 1930s changed everything for Nessie. Before then, the loch stories were mostly local, whispered in villages, told around fires, or written in dusty books. But when a new road was constructed along the edge of Loch Ness, something shifted. Suddenly, more people were traveling the area. Tourists, workers, drivers. And with more eyes came more sightings. Reports started appearing in newspapers, not just local papers, but national ones. Headlines claimed, "Monster spotted in Loch Ness." Some were cautious, suggesting misidentifications. Others were sensational, feeding readers a story that was impossible to ignore. Eyewitness accounts began to pour in, each one slightly different, yet eerily consistent in certain ways. Some described a series of humps rolling across the water, rising and falling like a line of small hills. Others claimed a long neck, emerging briefly before disappearing into the dark depths. A few mentioned a creature that seemed almost liquid in motion, sliding through the loch in a way which suggested intelligence, or at least intention. People began comparing their sightings. Newspapers printed them side by side, and slowly, the story transformed from local folklore to international fascination. The media didn't just report on the monster. They shaped the way people imagined it. When the next person saw something in the water, they knew what to expect. Humps, a long neck, a rolling movement. The image was already primed into the public mind. It's fascinating to think about the role of the storytelling itself. Was Nessie really being seen more often? Or did the power of suggestion, combined with the mystery of the loch, make ordinary things appear extraordinary? A log, a wave, a swimming deer, whatever it was, people were ready to believe. And with each article, each retelling, the legend grew stronger. By the end of the decade, Nessie wasn't just a local story. It was a global phenomenon, a creature that people were willing to chase, photograph, and, even if they didn't see it, spend nights imagining. The 1930s proved one thing. Sometimes the story itself can become as real as the thing it describes. In 1934, the legend of Nessie gained its most famous image, what would come to be known as the surgeon's photograph. Taken by a London doctor named Robert Kenneth Wilson, the black and white photo showed a long, thin neck rising from the water. The creature's small head seemed to peer back at the camera, its body hidden beneath dark waves. It was instantly captivating. Newspapers printed it. Magazines printed it. People around the world gazed at the photo and gasped. For decades, many took it as proof that the monster of Loch Ness truly existed. The photograph became the symbol of Nessie, the definitive image that confirmed what people had been whispering about for generations. Scientists and skeptics debated it, but the general public saw something undeniable in that long, mysterious neck breaking the water's surface. In 1994, 60 years later, the truth came out. The photograph was a hoax. It was carefully staged using a small model and a toy submarine. The man behind it admitted it, explaining how he and a few accomplices had crafted it to fool the world. And yet, even with that revelation, the photograph didn't erase the legend. Some people refused to let it go. They point to the other sightings, sonar readings, and local stories. They argue that one fake photograph doesn't negate decades of accounts. After all, the loch had been the source of stories long before the camera ever clicked. And that's the strange thing about Nessie. Even when proof turns out to be false, the feeling of possibility remains. The loch is still dark, still deep, still hiding something just beneath the surface. One fake photo doesn't erase every story, every whispered sighting, or the way the water itself seems alive. For some, the photograph is a lesson in skepticism. For others, it's just another layer of mystery. Proof that people are desperate to see something extraordinary. Either way, the image cemented Nessie's place in a popular culture and fueled the curiosity that has kept the legend alive for generations. And as we move forward, it's worth remembering the hoax may have fooled the world, but it didn't silence the loch. By the 1960s, Nessie had become more than a legend. She was a challenge. Scientists, cryptozoologists, and curious adventurers wanted proof, and Loch Ness seemed like the perfect laboratory. Expeditions were launched with modern technology, underwater cameras, echo sounders, and even sonar equipment that could detect movement beneath the surface. The goal was simple: find Nessie, or at least rule out the possibility entirely. And yet, the loch refuses to give up its secrets. Sonar readings showed large moving objects in the depths. Sometimes they were fast, sometimes slow. Sometimes they seemed intelligent, maneuvering in ways that no ordinary fish or aquatic creature should have been able to move. Cameras were lowered only to capture dark, indistinct shapes, or nothing at all. Scientists recorded dozens of anomalies, but by the time they reviewed the data, the conclusions were always inconclusive. No body, no bones, no definitive creature. The readings could be schools of fish. They could be floating logs. They could be something else entirely. And that's what makes Loch Ness so fascinating. It doesn't give up the answers easily. Every expedition brought hope, and every expedition left questions. The loch is enormous, its waters cold and murky, hiding more than any of us can see. Many scientists walked away, frustrated, convinced that the mystery was unsolvable. Others remained studying the loch for years, drawn by the possibility that something extraordinary was just out of reach. It's important to remember, these findings were not debunked. They were inconclusive. The loch's depths swallowed certainty, leaving behind only echoes, strange readings, and a sense of something moving just beneath the surface. And perhaps that's the point. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They exist not because we need answers, but because the unknown itself has power. Loch Ness remains a place of curiosity, wonder, and lingering unease. An environment so perfectly suited to the legend that even the most modern technology struggles to understand it. Of course, no discussion of Nessie would be complete without looking at the skeptics. Over the decades, experts have offered explanations for what people see in Loch Ness. sometimes mundane, sometimes surprisingly convincing. One common suggestion is giant eels. Loch Ness is home to eels, some of which can grow quite large. An eel's sinuous body, moving just below the surface, could create humps or undulating shapes. It's simple, it's natural, and in many cases, it seems plausible. Then there are logs or floating debris, a branch caught in a current, partially submerged, might look like a small hump to someone scanning the dark water. Waves, shadows, and reflections can make a simple piece of driftwood appear far more menacing than it really is. Seiches, or standing waves caused by wind and water pressure, also play a role. They can create moving patterns on the surface, sudden ripples, and mysterious swells that appear out of nowhere. To the untrained eye, these patterns could be interpreted as a large creature moving beneath the water. Or, of course, there are optical illusions. Fog, low light, and the dark, churning waters can trick the mind into seeing movement that isn't there. Humans are wired to recognize patterns and shapes. Sometimes we see what we expect to see. These explanations are compelling. They almost work. They could explain dozens of sightings, even some of the most famous ones. But they never explain everything. The timing, the consistency, the sheer number of reports over centuries. Something about the loch resists a full, neat explanation. It's like trying to pin a shadow to the wall. You can explain the shape, the movement, even the source of light, but the feeling of something watching remains. And that's why Loch Ness keeps drawing attention. Because even when science or skepticism gives an answer, the loch refuses to fully submit. No matter how many eels, logs, waves, or illusions you count, there's still that question lingering. Is there something more beneath the surface? When we think about Nessie, most of us picture a long-necked creature gliding through the dark water. But what if Nessie isn't a monster at all? Some suggest that she could be misidentified animals. A large fish, a seal swimming far upriver, or even a group of otters moving in formation could create shapes that appear monstrous, especially in low light. Others speculate about an unknown species, something surviving in the loch that science hasn't catalogued. Loch Ness is vast, dark, and cold. Its depths have barely been explored. Could there really be a creature lurking that's never been caught, never been documented, and only glimpsed briefly by few who dare to watch the water at night? Then there's a more unusual idea. Perhaps Nessie isn't a creature at all, but a phenomenon. Something in the water, the wind, or the light that creates shape, movements, and sensations that trick the human mind. Something that seems alive, but isn't. And yet, maybe the loch doesn't need a literal monster. Perhaps the endearing legend exists because we need it. Humans have always told stories to explain the unknown, to give shape to fear, to marvel at possibility. Nessie could be as much of a reflection of our imagination, living as a resident of the loch. The truth is, we may never know. that uncertainty is part of the magic. Because whether she's a fish, a phenomenon, or something entirely unknown, Nessie continues to haunt our imagination, to pull us back to the water, and to remind us that some mysteries are far more compelling when they remain unsolved. After centuries of sightings, photographs, hoaxes, and scientific searches, Nessie remains one of the world's most famous mysteries. But why does she still matter? Why does the story continue to capture our attention? I think it's because Nessie represents something larger than a single creature. She reminds us of the unknown, of places that resist our desire for certainty. She challenges our assumptions about the natural world, about what is possible, and about how much we really understand. And in a way, Nessie forces us to examine the balance between belief and proof. Some people demand evidence, others are content to feel the possibility. And both perspectives are valid. Because even without a body, a skeleton, or a definitive photograph, the loch has shaped imaginations, inspired legends, and kept people returning to its shores, hoping for a glimpse of the impossible. So maybe that's the real lesson. Some mysteries don't need answers to be real. The loch doesn't have to reveal its secrets to matter. The story, the sightings, the awe they inspire, that is proof enough that Nessie exists. In our imagination, in our culture, and in our hearts. If you've ever had a strange experience, a sighting you couldn't explain, or a story about a creature lurking in the water or the woods, I'd love to hear it. You can submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous, and you may hear them featured in a future episode. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.